Hi, today we're going to talk about the grid for the key of D major and B minor. So first thing you want to do, by the way, we're not going to be playing the ukulele today. We're going to be lecturing on the grid and getting you ready to understand it before you actually play it. Okay, so go ahead and grab your music sheet, the grid scale pattern for D major and B minor. Pause the tutorial, go get your sheet, get something to write with, pen, pencil, highlighter, whatever you need, and come on back. We'll get started in about 1 second. Okay, so you got your paper. Hopefully you took a bunch of notes in the earlier tutorial and you kind of have a basic understanding. The better understanding you have of this from the first tutorial in the series of the D major and B minor grid scale pattern family of chords, the better off you're going to be. If you have no concept of what where we're about to be heading and about what we're going to be talking about, in other words, when I say the D major grid, B minor grid, if you totally don't understand what I'm talking about, this lesson is going to be just totally overwhelming. Now, just to refresh your memory on the previous course, hopefully you took a bunch of notes on the family of chords and the theoretical section of music that works in conjunction with the scales and the grid and the notes that we're going to play on the fretboard. So in other words, you need to know that in the key of D major, you got a family of chords, you got the Roman numerals, you got a certain amount of chords that work in the family of chords for D major and B minor. Then you got the notes over here, and you know at least the D major and B minor, and you know the two scales of D major, and you're ready to go. Now, you're probably gonna have to take some more notes about what I'm talking about. Very important. Now, once again, really important. If you did not get a basic grasp on the first lecture tutorial in this section for D major, B minor, the very first one, we talk about the theory of how both of these, this and this, work in conjunction together. Okay, you need to go back to that. You need to listen to it again and again, and whatever it takes for you to get a grasp on it before you come to here. Because we're just going to basically review, get you ready, talk about a few more stuff, and then get you ready to play the grid and how to practice it. Okay, so let's get started. So in the key of D major and B minor, your signature is made up of two sharps, F sharp and C sharp, located just like that. So keep that in mind. Every time you're playing in the key of D major, B minor, by the way, first keeping it short, I'm just going to say D major, but you know I'm talking about D major and B minor. But I'm just going to say D major to keep it short. Okay, so when you're playing in these keys, you got to remember that you have an F sharp and a C sharp. So all your Fs and all your Cs are sharps. Okay, F and C sharp. So keep that in mind when you're playing in your grid or scales. We won't be using the top string, which is the G string, because it's a high-pitched G string. It doesn't really fall in the sequence of doing scales, etc. But if you want to go out and get a low G string, put it on a ukulele, by all means, you got more strings that you can play with in the scale patterns. Okay, so a lot of folks do that. The reason why I don't do that, merely for the fact that a majority of folks on a ukulele has ukulele with a high G, so I have to teach them in accordance to what they have available. But like I said, I know a lot of folks that buy a lower G string. They can utilize more of the fretboard, but it's up to you. You decide. Okay. So basically, we're going to be using the three strings of C, E, and A. The three strings that utilizes most of the scale patterns in the grid of D major and B minor. You already know the basic position, which is right over here for the D major scale, and then it extends for the D major extended scale. So that's what we covered so far. So it should, if you look at it that way, you know this section already. You practice it, you have it under control, maybe you got it memorized. Maybe some of you folks are really fluent at it at this time. Some of you folks may be able to do the D extended scale, major scale. So you basically know from here to there on 2 strings. And then we talked about the B minor scale. So you would kind of know like this section over here, and goes on a little bit more for you folks that have the resource of additional frets, or maybe a tenor ukulele. We talked about that before. That should be reviewed. So in essence, if you break it up into those sections, technically you probably know the entire fretboard for the key of D major and B minor. So think of it that way. Don't let this whole picture of the fretboard overwhelm you. So what we're going to be getting into in the upcoming tutorial is to show you how to break it down, how to practice it in smaller sections and chunks, and to put it in perspective where it's more understandable. But the goal, the final outcome, is to think about the entire grid, okay? Think about the entire grid when you play, as opposed to just small sections. But I realize that can be overwhelming. So, you know, let's just start off by thinking in smaller sections. But once again, the goal is to think of the entire grid. And then when you're playing, the concept that I like to use is that you're thinking about the entire grid is like a map, and you have one point and then you have another point. So you may be getting from one point, point A, and you want to go to point B, or going from one point to another point. And that's how you want to think. And I use the example of your house or your home, and getting from your house or your home to like the local drugstore, convenience store, gas station, whatever it is that you go to, school or whatever. But you know, in your neighborhood, that there's several streets and several ways to get from point A to point B, or from your house to wherever it is you're going. So that's the concept you want to think about. Now, I'm going to give an example. For instance, let's say we're in the key of D, so I'm going to pick the letter D because this is the strongest note, the most noticeable note that you're going to hear in the key of D or D major. So let's say this is your house, and you want to get to the letter D, which is, you know, wherever the shopping mall or the grocery store. Okay, you probably know various routes or streets that you can get there. Some may be faster, some may be shorter, longer. So think of that same concept. So when you're playing in the grid, you're thinking about various ways to get to your next destination. So, and this is just for explaining purposes. We're talking about going from D to D, because basically we're in the key of D, and we're talking about the D major grid. Okay, so that's basically how I'm using that example. So one way is to think about the D major extended position scale, and that's one way to get there. Or you could do that, start off by doing that scale, veer off a little bit and come back on, or maybe veer down, go this way, and then come back up to the D. So those are some concepts that you want to think about. There are other examples. Let me just put it this way. It can get more elaborate on how you think about playing your melodic lines. For instance, like using chords as a basis on how to play your melodies, and that's taught in another course. But just for keeping it very basic and simple, when you're playing in the grid, you're thinking about going from one point to another point, and you know, there's various things you want to keep in mind. Some folks like to play where it sounds good. Some folks like to play where it sounds interesting. Some folks like to play where it sounds complicated. Whatever the case may be, whatever the style is that you want to play, you're basically playing the grid. You have this resource of the entire grid of all the notes. So basically, if you're playing with the family of chords, remember down here, if you're playing and using the family of chords for this key of D major, you can play all these notes and it will fit, it will work with your family of chords. So hopefully you took some notes. We're going to go over that some more in the upcoming tutorial, where I'll show you how it kind of works. But you need to understand that, okay? And you need to grasp the concept behind it, because if you don't, then it's not really going to make a whole lot of sense when we go over it and when I show it to you and how it works. So at this point, a couple things you want to keep in mind. From this tutorial, from this lecture, you understood what I said and you're ready to move on. Or you kind of got a basic grasp, maybe some things a little bit unclear, but you have a basic foundation where you're not really that lost. Maybe just bits and pieces. And then maybe this is unclear to you. Maybe you're getting lost. If that's the case, you need to back up. You need to go back to the first tutorial in the series of D major and B minor, the very first tutorial in that section. Listen to that beginning section where we explain everything, okay? Because if you don't have a grasp on that basic foundation and concept for that, in the next upcoming tutorials, it's just going to get more complicated and you won't really understand why you're doing it or how you're doing it, etc. So, case being, you decide on what it is, the route you're going to take, but I highly recommend that you, from this point, before going on any further, that you understand what we have talked about. If need be, and maybe you're just a little bit unclear, maybe you just got to back up or listen to the tutorial again. And keep in mind, the more that you listen to the tutorial and lessons, you're going to pick up more stuff, because you can't pick up all of this stuff just on one listening, because there's a lot of information in there. Okay, with that being said, when you think you're ready to move on to the next lesson, be sure you're ready, because it's going to get more complicated and more intricate, more elaborate. Once you're ready, we'll see you for the next lesson.